The difference between the pesticides and the nerve gases is simply in terms of how toxic the nerve gases are. The nerve gases are much, much more toxic than any insecticide that is ever used on a farm or to control insects. There was this German chemist, Gerhard Schrader, who worked for a big German chemical company called IG Farben. And he was a brilliant chemist. He was looking at large numbers, making large numbers of organophosphate chemicals to have them tested as insecticides. And in the course of making these chemicals, he made one chemical that turned out to be used as a nerve gas called tabun, and this was discovered in 1936. And he made another one in 1938, which became another nerve gas called sarin. And when these agents were then tested for their effects on insects and other things, they were seen to be so toxic and too toxic to ever be able to be used as insecticides. And because of their toxicity, that information was then passed on to the German authorities, who recognized that these were potential weapons of war. One of the things that DDT was so important for was controlling malaria. And in the Second World War, when the soldiers were fighting in the Far East and in the jungles in the Pacific, they were concerned to control malaria because malaria killed far more soldiers than were ever affected by bullets from the Japanese or shells from the Japanese. Many of the chemical companies were working on chemical warfare agents. They used chlorine, they produced mustard gas, they produced another agent in the United States called lewisite. Of course, once that market was no longer there, I mean, these chemicals weren't needed because the war had finished, there was now peace. And so the question then was, well, what do they use their industries for? How do they continue to guarantee an income? And they saw an opportunity to move into the control of insect pests. But of course the way they treated people, I mean, they just doused them in DDT. Because the evidence that they had at that time, the scientific evidence they had, was that DDT was not a particularly toxic chemical.
The deadly potato pest has been spotted in crops somewhere between Dagenham and Southend. Flying squad girls can treat the worst patches with insecticide, but often the heavy artillery of pest prevention has to be called up. Whole acres can be doctored this way with death-dealing chemicals in a few hours.
The evidence for harm didn't come from the chemical companies, from their research. It came from outside observations by ecologists, people concerned about bird life. They just noticed declining populations of birds, and they gradually accumulated the evidence and presented it to the companies. Rachel Carson put the evidence together extremely well. I mean, the time had come. The evidence was there. What it needed was someone to compile it and put it together in a way that was irrefutable, and that's what she did.
And why Silent Spring?
Because she just felt that it was killing the birds, and spring is associated with birdsong, and without the birds there would be silence.